A trade at corner is bad news for Brandon Stevens, a shuffle at linebacker, and Aaron Glenn clarifies the quarterback situation. Locked on Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, September 24th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Lots of Jets news to break down. We have a busy show, so we will move our mailbag on to Friday. Usually we do our mailbags today, but there's so much to break down that we have to get to all of the Jets news. Aaron Glenn made a big statement on the Jets quarterback situation. The Jets shuffle up their linebacker position because of injuries, and the team makes a big trade at the cornerback position, which is where we will start. And if you missed the news yesterday, the Jets have made an attempt to upgrade a position that has been an issue this season. They made a deal for a corner, Jarvis Brownlee from the Tennessee Titans. He's a second-year corner. It's a late-round pick swap, so it's the classic 6 for a 7 plus a player. So the Jets get a 7 along with Brownlee. They send a 6 to Tennessee. So not a big price. I mean, this is a move that's maybe like a half step above a waiver claim. And there are many different angles of this deal you can break down. I think the number one angle is it shows that this coaching staff and this front office are not happy with Brandon Stevens. And there is no reason for them to be happy with Brandon Stevens. Brandon Stevens has been terrible the first 3 weeks of the season. He's been so bad that even though it's only been 3 weeks, he deserves a benching. Even though he is a high-paid free agent who the Jets just brought in this offseason, he deserves a benching. And there's not much you can say good so far about this Glenn Mauigoa regime through 3 weeks. And it's only 3 weeks, so I don't want to go crazy. I don't want to say that these guys are finished, but there's not a lot positive. One thing you can say that's positive is they seem willing to move on from mistakes. They did it in training camp when it was clear their defensive tackle situation was not going to work out. They made a low-cost move to add Harrison Phillips, another low-cost move to add Juwan Briggs. Now the corner situation's not working out. Brandon Stevens, even though they gave him a lot of money, even though they kind of went out on a limb for Stevens, he's not been working out. So the Jets make a move. They get Jarvis Brownlee in here. Brownlee was a rookie last year. He was a day 3 draft pick by Tennessee, but got into the starting lineup and was a starting corner for the Titans. And if you follow what people are saying in the Titans fan base today, there's a lot of confusion about why they just gave away a starting corner to the New York Jets. I would not be surprised to see Brownlee in the starting lineup in place of Stevens sooner rather than later. Now, he is injured, so I'm not sure he's going to be able to play against Miami this coming week. We'll probably get more of an update later today when the Jets release their first injury report. I don't know that Brownlee is going to be ready to play, but I would not be surprised if Stevens' play does not improve, that Brownlee is in the starting lineup as soon as he's healthy. Now, what caliber of play can the Jets expect from Brownlee? This is where it gets a little bit dicier. And this was kind of odd yesterday because I saw people citing stats for Brownlee that really weren't that good and framing it optimistically. Last year he gave up 663 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a 104.1 passer rating in coverage. That's not very good. And people were saying that was like super impressive. Now, Brownlee was a rookie. He was a late round pick. It's probably the classic situation where a bad team had nothing. So they just decided, let's get the rookie some reps. Let's see what the rookie can do. And hopefully he'll improve with that. So this could be a situation perhaps where another team uses reps to develop a player and the Jets benefit. I think that's a hope. But Brownlee's also very grabby. Committed 9 penalties last year, has 11 penalties so far in a career that spans just a year and change. Very grabby kind of corner. The thing that worries me about him is that he's also a little undersized for an outside corner. I mean, he's not super small, but he's a little undersized. And sometimes what you see is when a corner commits a lot of penalties and he likes to be physical and he's a little small, the penalties are a result of him just kind of being manhandled. I think that that's a big concern when we talk about Brownlee, can he develop? Because I see a lot of analysis out there that, oh, well, they just have to clean up the penalties, which, it's not easy to do. I mean, you look at corners across the league. There are lots of corners who commit a lot of penalties. If it was that easy to clean up, those corners would stop committing penalties. But I think that there might be a reason behind those penalties that goes beyond technique issues. I think it just might be he's a little too small to play on the outside. Now, could he be an upgrade on Brandon Stephens despite the penalty issues, despite the less than stellar coverage stats? Absolutely. Is he a guy who has room to improve? Well, he's only in year 2. He got starting reps in year 1. Lots of day 3 picks don't get reps. The best way to improve as a player is to get reps in actual game situations, because you can't replicate that in practice, especially these days where practices are so much less physical than they were in the past. The problem is coaches don't really have the luxury of using reps in games to develop players for the most part. So you have to try and develop guys on the practice field, because you can't send guys out there who can't play just for the sake of developing them in most cases. So this is a rare player who actually got an opportunity to start for a year. So hopefully you'll see some improvement there. But when I look at this guy's profile, I actually think that his long-term home might be at slot corner, because by all accounts, he's a very aggressive guy and a very good tackler from the corner position. And it's nice to have an outside corner who helps in run support, but slot corners do need to be able to tackle. Slot corners really do need to be able to play the run, because typically your slot corner is a guy who replaces a linebacker, and linebackers have run assignments in a way outside corners don't. And when you put a slot corner in for a linebacker, that slot corner inherits the run assignments of the linebacker he's replacing. And I think a lack of size is less of an issue in the slots. The position's evolving in the NFL, offenses are evolving, but it's not as big of a deal to be a little undersized in the slot, because you're not trying to play a lot of press coverage in the slot. When you're playing on the outside, you have the sideline as kind of an extra defender. So what you're trying to do when you play press coverage is you're trying to steer the receiver to the sideline and take away his space. Because if you can pin a guy to the sideline, then he has no room to operate. When you're playing in the slot, the receiver can run either way. The receiver has the full field at his disposal. So it's more about breaking with the receiver. It's more about being explosive. Now, Brownlee's athletic testing numbers were not great. They weren't terrible, but they weren't great. They were right at the fringe of what you'd call acceptable for a corner. And he also did most of his athletic testing at his pro day, and the numbers at the pro day tend to be inflated. So this is not a guy who's a phenomenal athlete for the corner position, not a terrible athlete, but I think this is the type of guy who's probably going to have to win more on instinct. Some guys are just amazing athletes. They can just get to the spot quicker than anybody else. Then there are the guys who aren't as quick. They need to just start earlier. They need to be able to read a play quicker and get a jump start out of it. That's the type of thing Brownlee will need to be able to do. And I think the hope is that maybe some of the reps he got last year, some of the more experience will improve his instincts and give him an opportunity to succeed. I think at the start of his Jets career, you're looking at a Brandon Stephens replacement. I think this trade officially puts Brandon Stephens on notice. And I'm not sure how well it's going to work out, because Brownlee has some issues himself, but I think that we can celebrate that Brandon Stephens is on notice. And like I said, I mean, you can have issues with a lot of things Glenn and Muji have done so far. I think one positive is they don't become stubborn when it becomes clear they've made a mistake. It was true with the defensive tackle spot. It seems to be true in the corner spot now. Lots of front offices, lots of coaching staffs, if they believe in a guy and they sign him to a big money deal, or they invest an early draft pick in him, they're going to stick with that guy through thick and thin, even when it's obviously a mistake. And of course, it's a balance. You don't want to give up on anybody too soon, but you don't want to stick with the mistake just because you made it. The best way to correct a mistake is to start correcting it as soon as possible. And I think the hope is that this trade will help the Jets start to fix a mistake in signing Brandon Stephens as soon as possible. And you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. Cornerback is not the only position that saw a bit of a shuffle for the Jets on Tuesday. Linebacker did also. Unfortunately, it's because the Jets suffered a couple injuries, but it's going to give a young guy a chance to succeed and give a young guy some of those critical reps that we just talked about with Brownlee. We'll discuss more as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers with confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel the craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets made a big trade yesterday, bringing in cornerback Jarvis Brownlee from the Tennessee Titans. But that was not the only transaction the team made. Unfortunately, Jets have gotten really banged up at the linebacker position. Quincy Williams goes to injured reserve with a shoulder injury. He had to leave Sunday's loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers early, and placing him on IR means that he will miss at least 4 games. His primary backup, Marcelino McCrary-Ball, also going to injured reserve. So the Jets down 2 linebackers. They're now down a starter and their top backup. Not what you want to see. And one of the things we talked about on this show heading into the season was that the Jets had decent high-end talent. What this roster really lacked, though, was depth. And this was a team that could not afford any big injuries. Unfortunately for this team, the injury bug has bitten a lot early in the season. Justin Fields with the concussion, Jermaine Johnson missing Sunday's game, and now Quincy Williams going to IR along with Marcelino McCrary-Ball. So, Jets are really now having to dig deep at the linebacker position. Into the starting lineup, presumably, will be Francisco Mauigoa, a guy who was a day 3 pick this year, a rookie getting an opportunity, a guy who was not a huge prospect in the NFL draft. And part of it's that he wasn't an overwhelming physical player, but a guy who at Miami flashed on the film a lot. Sometimes at the linebacker position, the guys who succeed aren't the greatest athletes. I mean, we've seen this over and over with the Jets. I mean, how many times have the Jets brought in a great athlete? Darren Lee comes to mind, a guy with phenomenal athletic testing, but never in the right place. And at the linebacker position, it's one of those spots where, of course, athleticism helps. Of course, I'd rather have a guy who's athletic than a guy who's not athletic, but it's more about being in the right spot, filling the right gap, being there, being dependable to make tackles. Mauigoa was that sort of player at Miami. And sometimes guys like him, not always, but sometimes guys like him step into the NFL and they get a little overlooked because, they're not the most overwhelming physical specimen, and they go out and play well. And I think for where the Jets are at 0-3, with a team that is not making the playoffs, a team with a first-year coach, first-year GM, and a team where we knew going in, progress was going to be subjective. And a big part of progress would be seeing this team improve during the course of the season. We want to see a better team in December and January than we've seen in September and October. An opportunity like an injury like this is in some ways an opportunity for a team. It's an opportunity to get the Jets to get a young player some reps who otherwise would not have an opportunity to get into the lineup. On yesterday's show, I talked about how at 0-3, the Jets need to start changing their mindset, and they need to start prioritizing player development as much as they prioritize winning games. And I think that these are not mutually competing objectives either, because the guys who could get snaps as young players would be replacing guys who just aren't playing that well as veterans. But Quincy Williams' injury gives Mauigoa a chance to get reps. And we just talked about this with Jarvis Brownlee, how maybe those reps he got as a rookie, even though the play was very up and down, will give him an opportunity to be a better player going forward. I think that that's the hope with Mauigoa. Now Mauigoa gets a chance to play. He gets a chance to get live game action. It's just different from being on the practice field. And you get a chance to see what a player can be. Sometimes a player surprises you. Sometimes you think a guy's going to be a backup and he gets an opportunity and he goes out and plays really well. That's what happened with Jamie and Sherwood last year. I think the Jets coaching staff viewed Sherwood as a backup level player. Well, CJ Mosley went down and Sherwood had a big season. Now, course, Sherwood's not having a great year in 2025, but still opportunity to bounce back. In any event, I think that the game reps will sharpen Mauigoa's skills going forward. And, even if he's just a backup, getting an opportunity to play live game action, I think that's going to be a real benefit for him going forward. And it gives the Jets an opportunity to see maybe if they have a surprise player they were not expecting. Now, the Jets made another move at the linebacker position. They brought in a practice squatter from the New England Patriots, because you have to remember the Jets placed two linebackers on IR yesterday. So they needed to get another body in here to play the linebacker position. The player they brought in is Mark Robinson. They signed him off the New England practice squad. Robinson was initially a 7th-round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers a few years back, spent a couple of years in Pittsburgh, actually started 4 games for the Steelers, but was primarily a special teamer, caught on with the Patriots practice squad this year, and the Jets signed him to their active roster. And you have to remember that practice squad players are technically free agents. They can sign with the active roster of any other team. If you're on the practice squad, you can't sign with another team's practice squad, but if any of the other 31 teams offer you a spot on their active roster, you are allowed to sign with them. So Jets bring in Mark Robinson from New England. Who is Mark Robinson? Again, with an interesting profile. He was a running back for much of his career, converted to linebacker late during his college career, had a good enough season to get drafted in the 7th round by Pittsburgh. And has primarily been a special teamer. I think this is the type of guy who only plays linebacker for the Jets in case of an emergency. Another guy who does not have the greatest athletic profile, but also new to the position. One thing that was clear, if you go back to watch his college film in Mississippi, is this guy can deliver big hits. And that's the sort of thing that can have value on special teams. And, there's maybe an outside chance he can develop into something going forward because he's so new to the position. That's one thing I always look for when the Jets bring in some guy to be a back of the roster guy. What's his story? And is there a reason to think maybe he could be a late bloomer? And in Robinson's case, because he was a linebacker for much of his career, because he's new to the linebacker position, because he was running back for much of his career, because he's new to the linebacker position, maybe there's a shot that, once he gets more experience at linebacker, he can develop into a reliable player. Again, not a great athlete, but going back to what I said about Mauigoa, it's not always the best athletes who play the best at linebacker. It's about the guys who have instincts, guys who know where to be. And I also look at trajectory when we talk about players. And Robinson's a guy who went from being an offensive player to getting drafted shortly after moving to the defensive side of the ball. So, he's got the backstory that you look for a guy who conceivably could be a diamond in the rough. I'm not saying it's going to happen. In fact, my guess is that when Quincy and McCrary Ball are healthy and are activated, that Robinson's going to be a guy who, probably gets cut. Maybe he heads to the Jets practice squad after that. I think that Robinson's path to staying on the roster is probably more about contributing on special teams, on Chris Banjo's units, than it is playing well at the linebacker position. I think the Jets would definitely like to avoid putting him in early because he's still got to get up to speed on the Jets defensive system. This is going to be a new system for him. You don't want to put in a guy you just signed off another team's practice squad too soon. So Mauigoa is probably going to step into the starting lineup. The Jets bring in Robinson to kind of help themselves just have enough bodies as they head into this Week 4 game against the Miami Dolphins. And we'll see what happens. I'm not saying this is going to be another Jamie and Sherwood situation where a guy surprises you, but when you're 0-3, those are the things you're looking for. You're looking for young guys who maybe step into bigger roles than you were expecting, guys who offer surprise contributions, and guys maybe who can be part of your foundation going forward. We'll see. We can always hope, though. Hope's all we got for the Jets. And during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a position where we need a lot of hope, the quarterback position. Aaron Glenn clarified who the starting quarterback is going forward once Justin Fields is healthy. It's no surprise, and it's the right decision. We'll break it down as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your team wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching the Jets or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays, or in this case, Monday, because the Jets are playing Monday Night Football in Miami against the 0-3 Dolphins, a battle of a couple of teams that have not won yet in 2025. And the Dolphins are favored. The Jets are 2.5-point road underdogs currently on FanDuel. If you want to get in on the action, though, FanDuel is the place to do it. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. Lots of Jets news to break down today. Jets make a big trade at corner. They're dealing with some linebacker injuries, so we have a new starter. We have a new player on the roster at that position. But we're going to close the show by talking about the quarterback position. Aaron Glenn clarified what the hierarchy is at quarterback early this week, and it's no surprise. Glenn confirmed that once Justin Fields is cleared to return from his concussion, he will resume his role as the starting quarterback. I actually was surprised Glenn was asked that question at all by the media because it seemed kind of obvious to me. Now, I will say this. Going into the Tampa Bay game, if Tyrod Taylor had sparked the team, if Tyrod Taylor had looked really good, I think that we would be having a different discussion. And I don't think that there was anything Tyrod Taylor could do in the Tampa Bay game to permanently become the team's starting quarterback. But I think if Tyrod had played really well and the Jets had won, he probably would have kept the job at least for another week. I think sometimes in situations like this, when the backup plays really well and the starter's kind of struggling, maybe you slow walk the return of the starter from injury. It's been known to happen in the past in the NFL. It would not be surprised to have seen it happen again because, if the Jets had won last week, they'd be 1-2, and we'd be having very different discussions about this team and where it was going and, what its prospects could be for 2025. And, you probably would play the hot hand until he cooled off. Tyrod just did not play a very good game, and if you watch that game, you saw why, aside from those 3 years in Buffalo, Tyrod has been a career backup. He was staring down his first reads, making slow decisions, not getting the ball where it needed to go. And I think that in retrospect, it's probably not a surprise because the book on Tyrod is he's like your stereotypical game manager. He doesn't really move the offense in a consistent way, but he avoids the big mistake. And if you saw how many times he wasn't letting it rip when his first read was open, I mean, that's like game manager 101, where you're not moving the offense consistently. You're not getting the ball where it needs to go on the first read, but you're avoiding the big mistake, aside from, of course, the big mistake he did make, which was the terrible pick six right before halftime. Tyrod, of course, did heat up late in the game when the Bucs kind of backed off. They pretty much stopped defending the first 10 yards of the field in the fourth quarter, and they really called off the blitz. They were blitzing him about two out of three passing attempts the first three quarters. That dropped to about 1 out of 4 passing attempts in the fourth quarter. It was the script we know well. It's a script we saw play out many times when Todd Bowles was the Jets head coach. Bowles gets too conservative sometimes in these spots and plays not to lose when he's got a lead, and it can hurt him. It can hurt you, and it certainly hurt Tampa Bay on Sunday. They were very fortunate to win that game. And a lot of that goes back to their approach in the fourth quarter. But look, Tyrod's a backup level quarterback. I think we know that. He's not a terrible quarterback. He's not a terrible backup to have, but he's not a guy you want as a long-term starter because he's never been a long-term starter in this league. He's been a starter really 3 years in Buffalo and then a couple seasons where he's been the placeholder before a rookie took over at quarterback, whether you want to talk Cleveland with Baker Mayfield, the Chargers with Justin Herbert. Tyrod's not more than that. Fields, well, we know that Fields has a steep hill to climb. And I think that we all acknowledge, or at least most of us acknowledge, when the Jets signed Fields that it was very likely to not work because Fields has not lived up to his draft pedigree. He was a guy who was drafted very highly in the first round in 2021, and he's now on his third team in 5 years. A year ago, he was traded for just a late round pick from Chicago to Pittsburgh. Fields has not been consistent through his career. Fields' career, in many ways, was embodied by those first 2 weeks. Highs that really entice you, good moments that make you dream that this guy could be your savior at quarterback, and then falling back to earth immediately. Just a dismal game in week 2. And I think that the hope for the Jets going forward will be that Fields plays well enough to justify staying in the lineup into next season. Because what the Jets want to avoid is heading into the draft feeling like they're desperately in need of a quarterback. And if Fields plays well enough, I'm not saying Fields is going to be the long-term solution. In fact, I've never said Fields is going to be the long-term solution. I've never said that's likely. I don't even think it's a viable scenario until Fields shows some level of consistency. The question with Fields is, can he avoid the total disaster games like he had against the Buffalo Bills in week 2? Because Fields has, throughout his career, not been able to stack good games. He'll have a great game one week and then a precipitous fall the next week. In fact, I gave you a stat after the Buffalo game. I mean, that was the 7th time in his career he's had a QBR drop of 40 points from week to week. It's just an incredible decline from week to week, and it shows the level of inconsistency Justin Fields plays with. But he gives you high-end playmaking ability in a way Tyrod Taylor does not. And the Jets have to see if they can channel this ability into something more consistent, or if not something more consistent, at least a player where the lows are not as low, where his bad games are at least decent enough to give you a chance to win. And I also think for the way this Jets team is constructed, Fields is the quarterback who gives you a greater chance to win because Fields can produce splash plays. If you watch that game, the Jets really had no ability to make big plays with Tyrod Taylor at the quarterback position. That's not true with Fields. We saw it week 1. The Jets made a lot of explosive plays week 1. The problem with Fields was week 2, he did not follow it up. The problem was week 2, he missed a lot of very easy throws. But I think you saw that Tyrod can't really create much on his own. Fields can. Fields can break big runs. Fields' ability to extend plays in the pocket can produce big plays in the passing game in a way Tyrod's really can't right now. The only thing Tyrod has is a willingness to push the ball down the field. But it didn't really do the Jets a lot of good in that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it's clear that Fields is the guy who should be the quarterback. That doesn't mean the results are necessarily going to be great, but Fields just offers you so much more in terms of whether you have a better opportunity to win now and in terms of whether Fields can potentially be at least a medium-term bridge solution. Tyrod really can't answer either of those questions affirmatively. With Fields, it's going to be a tough road, but there's at least a chance there. So Fields should remain the starting quarterback. Now, will he be the starting quarterback week 4? It depends on whether he's cleared from the concussion or not. And I think we're going to have clarity on that in the next day or two. Usually you want to have it resolved by Wednesday because Wednesday is when you start to install your game plan. So maybe it's today. With the Monday night game, you do have the extra day. So you don't really need to start installing your game plan until Thursday because you have that extra day. So maybe this pushes till Thursday, but I would not be surprised if we had clarity on the Jets quarterback situation within the next 24 to 48 hours. If Fields is clear, though, he will be in the lineup and he should be in the lineup. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.